When the Nuremberg trials brought Nazi leaders to justice, all people hoped and believed that the most horrific war, which cost humanity millions of lives, would never happen again. But what do we see today with the passage of time? Nazism is once again starting to rise. Some of you may think this is fantasy, science fiction, that we are making things up. Stay with us, and we will show you just how wrong you are.
Let us make it clear right from the start, we do not promote Nazism in any form. But today, we will present quotes and facts to show that Nazism has come back to life after all these years. We see this in the rhetoric that is increasingly appearing in some media around the world. What was characteristic of Nazi propaganda? As the Encyclopedia Britannica states, Hitler viewed Jews as polluters of the race and a cancerous tumor of German society. The metaphor of a cancerous tumor was one of Hitler's favorites and most frequently used. It served as a tool for the systematic dehumanization not only of the Jewish population, but also other groups. The goal was to make the public accept the necessity of the final solution to the Jewish question, in other words, genocide.
Well, I have a specific quote prepared to illustrate how Hitler expressed himself directly about the Czechs. I'll read it out with your permission. This Czech illness must be dealt with once and for all, immediately. It is like a cancer in the entire organism of Europe. If allowed to grow, it will infect international relations until they finally break down.
Let's read another quote. They turn people into tools of cults and destroy their families. Cults harm individuals, families, societies, and countries like cancerous cells in a healthy body. Cults bring no benefit to society. Instead, they drain human resources and wealth from society, just as cancerous cells feed off the healthy body of society until it fails. Well, if you think that this was another statement by Hitler, unfortunately, you're mistaken. This statement was made in 2013 by a representative of a pro-religious transnational organization that is once again promoting Nazism in today's society. According to the dehumanizing rhetoric, followers of this pro-religious organization can be identified all over the world. Moreover, back to the subject of Jews. Under Nazism, Jews were not only labeled as cancer, but also as poison, parasites, toxic fungi, and similar terms.
And it's unbelievable that the same rhetoric is appearing in our countries, here in Central Europe. For example, the religious scholar Mate Karasek uses his own rhetoric about bacteria and attacks on the immune system, comparing people to this blight, and essentially repeating exactly what Hitler talked about. Now take a close look at the screen. Pause the video, read and compare the two texts. It's also important to understand that the rhetoric of Nazism is still alive. Unfortunately, we found plenty of examples. But it's worth stopping and asking, what did this dehumanization during Nazism ultimately lead to? The Holocaust. Over 6 million Jews died.
And let us not forget that it wasn't just the Jews. It also affected Slavs, Romani people, Jehovah's Witnesses, which brings the total number of Holocaust victims to between 11 and 17 million people. In fact, the Nazi persecution system targeted a massive number of different organizations, clubs, and associations, including the Grail movement, the Baha'i faith, Adventists, Baptists, the Anthroposophical or Theosophical societies, and even selected dance and alternative schools. In short, anyone the Nazis pointed their finger at and labeled a target in their propaganda had to face persecution. And these persecutions came in various forms, including bans, confiscation of property, discrimination in the workplace or in the worst cases, physical elimination of those who were labeled as enemies of society in Nazi propaganda.
These are just a few examples of dehumanization and how Nazism is once again gaining strength. I would like to address the law enforcement agencies with a question. What have you been doing? Why didn't you act when this was happening right before your eyes? For the past 10 years, we have been the target of this dehumanization and discrimination, yet you haven't lifted a finger, even though it's been happening right before your eyes. Why? Was it because we didn't file a criminal complaint? And when we did, you swept it under the rug with the hackneyed excuse that it wasn't a criminal act, that the incident didn't happen, even though it had all the signs of genocide. Or am I wrong? And it wasn't a genocide?
All right, let's turn to some experts. Let's look at an academic article titled, "Can We Prevent Genocide by Preventing Incitement?" The authors of this study argue that genocide is the leading cause of violent death in the 20th century, with up to 280 million victims. And so, when we look at it from the perspective of public health and preventive medicine, if something like this is happening, and we could foresee such an event, it logically follows that we can also prevent it. The authors state that, of course, once killing, rape, and looting begin, talking about preventing genocide becomes absolutely pointless.
It's already too late.
Exactly, it's too late. They point out that there are two factors which often predict the initiation, promotion, or provocation of genocide in society. These two factors are the use of dehumanizing hate speech and incitement of hatred. According to the authors, these factors can be identified and therefore recognized.
Hate speech is defined as the use of expressions that lead to dehumanization, stigmatization, and demonization of certain groups in society. This can be based on their ethnicity, religion, race, political beliefs, or, as we see today, other criteria. Dehumanization refers specifically to hateful language that includes metaphors and comparisons, often drawn from the realm of public health care. We've heard what Hitler used: tumors, cancer cells, and so on. And it actually evokes disgust and resistance in people, leading them to reject that group on the basis of that, which is also incitement. That is why it is used intentionally, as the goal of all this is to incite expressed hatred in society, which means it effectively provokes people to take action. They then go out and manifest that hatred in some form of aggressive physical behavior.
Perpetrators need these two tools, and they are absolutely essential to achieve the desired outcome. Because inciting a group of people to simply rise up and go kill someone, to gas, burn, or somehow kill their children, to do something that completely contradicts our human nature, it is necessary to convince them in some way. The long-term use of hate speech, that kind of labeling hateful language directed at a specific group of people, which may not even be based on truth, is how a certain group is manipulated, and then they go out and carry it out. We also know that in Auschwitz, people were killed in gas chambers, but Abraham Joshua Heschel said, Auschwitz was not built with stones, but with words.
That is actually the goal of dehumanization, because for one person to do something like that to another, they must have the belief in their mind that the other is not a human being, but rather, let's say, some kind of a pig. Because which person would...
He must primarily justify that his actions are right.
Are right. Exactly. What is also interesting about hate speech is that it provokes one group to commit these extreme negative acts, while at the same time, it silences another group, whether it is the affected group or similar ones. Thus, it also serves to instill fear in people and to silence them.
It's that classic approach. I don't actually belong to that group, I'm just watching. It doesn't concern me.
But what this causes in society as a whole is a certain emotional numbness, which means that we become indifferent to one another and no longer behave fully as human beings. It is said that indifference is one of the worst manifestations of societal degradation.
So it turns out that dehumanization actually affects the entire population.
Yes, right.
And you just end up in one of those three groups of people.
Exactly.
And there is also another very important factor. At that moment, not only does it create indifference, but it also evokes panic in people. This means that when they see one group starting to be demeaned or slandered, it automatically instills fear in others.
Yes.
That if I say something, I'll end up just like them.
Just like them.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like the example in that square.
with the guillotine.
They kill that one person. It doesn't matter who that person is. What matters are those who are watching, and they won't dare to speak up. That's also a very key problem.
We should probably mention that what we currently see against us as Alatra is 400 dehumanizing articles in 3 weeks. 400! That is a huge number, and we already see that it works. The tool of dehumanization, because in the comments, what kind of comments do we receive? We have talked about this many times. There are truly enormous expressions of hatred. At the same time, intimidation works as well, because just like us, a huge other group or a multitude of people is being slandered. And as we've also discussed, they remain silent precisely because they think that if they stay silent, they will have peace. But the question is whether that will be the case.
Exactly. And as you mentioned with the example of the guillotine in the square and so on, that's why we talked so often about information terrorism in previous roundtables. That is exactly why a significant portion of the documentary, The Impact, is dedicated to what information terrorism means. Because what we see are targeted media attacks that lead to the destruction of people's lives. It causes the radicalization of society. On another group, it creates immense fear. And for a third group, it leads to issues at work, problems in families, and troubles everywhere. This destroys people's lives. And what is the worst? As we have already said, those who are not affected prefer to remain silent because they subconsciously fear that if they start speaking out, they will find themselves in the group that is being dehumanized in the media. But as one famous quote says, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Do nothing.
Or, for example, the famous human rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. said, "He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it."
As you have already mentioned, dehumanization precisely employs medical language with terms that tend to evoke disgust in people, such as cancers, tumors, viruses, bacteria,
Infections.
infections, among other things. Also, animal terms like rats, cockroaches, everything that evokes disgust in people. But in recent times, I have wrote out some examples, because you can't think of such a thing. They are starting to call people to the devils or Satan. The persecution of these groups is equated with the restoration of human rights, which is like...
That's really harsh.
It's a total mockery, right? These people are labeled as sexual predators, accused of having ability to kill, and that they must be eliminated. In general, we have this feeling or perception that genocide ended with the Holocaust, and yet we fail to realize that this genocide continues to this day.
Let's take a look at some examples of how this works in practice. In the 1990s, after the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, more than 100,000 people were killed in Bosnia as part of Serbian ethnic cleansing. Radovan Karadzic made the following statement: "In 2-3 days, Sarajevo will vanish, and there will be 500,000 dead people. In a month, Muslims will disappear from Bosnia. First of all, none of their leadership would make it alive. They would all be killed in a matter of several hours. They would not even have a chance to survive." This type of incitement directly preceded the genocidal mass slaughter of civilians.
And just think about how it culminated in Rwanda in 1994. There, 800,000 men, women, and children were killed, both from the Tutsi and Hutu sides. It's also interesting that the victims weren't only the target group, but in a way, those who carried out the killings as well. It shows that there's no distinction made. But what's particularly interesting about this example is that it's the most well-documented case of a long-planned, systematic genocide carried out with the help of the media. Because there was a private radio station through which the majority of the population received all the information. And it was through this tool that the hate speech spread, labeling certain groups of people with contempt. After a period of 3 years, there's actually an image from one study showing how these factors, which incite genocide, can be traced over 3 years. Then there was a turning point, and within 100 days, 800,000 people were killed.
So, at this point, everyone should realize what's happening now in the media. It's the same as what you've just described, a dangerous threat, a potential threat.
They are not given the opportunity to speak out.
Yes.
Exactly. And we won't give a full exhaustive list because the fact is that genocide is occurring today in the 21st century in many different places around the globe, including Iran, Egypt, Sri Lanka, and since 2018, there has been genocide against Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia.
What's shocking is that genocide did not end with the extermination of Jews in Nazi Germany. Even though the Nuremberg Military Tribunal prosecuted and convicted those who actively promoted dehumanization, meaning these individuals used their writings, articles, and images to call for the physical elimination of a specific group of people, a particular ethnic group. One such example was Julius Streicher, who was the publisher of the newspaper Der Stürmer, which regularly published dehumanizing articles about Jews, often using the exactly mentioned terms. I'll quote, for example, "The sun will not shine on the nations of the earth until the last Jew is dead," or "You must realize that the Jew wants our people to perish. That is why you must join us and leave those who have brought you nothing but war, inflation, and discord." Or, "For thousands of years the Jew has been destroying the nations." Streicher defended himself at Nuremberg by claiming that he had not directly participated in the extermination. He insisted that he had simply informed people and that his articles were educational, addressing a problem he saw as serious at the time. He claimed that he only learned about the mass killings when he was arrested.
So he was just educating people.
Yes.
He was just informing the public.
This strongly resembles something from today.
Just a quick note. Let's take a look at what the UN Convention says, which was established after World War II. It defined genocide as the worst crime against humanity and stated that genocide is a legal and scientific term for the deliberate attempt to destroy members of a selected nation or other group, or inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part. To put it into simpler terms, it essentially means creating conditions in which it becomes harder for people to survive. This can include loss of jobs and employment, among other things.
Exactly.
Exactly. The condemnation in the eyes of the public, such marginalization.
It's actually a systematic and prolonged worsening of conditions until it eventually leads to their destruction. And if we look at what's happening to us, we've already mentioned it here. 400 dehumanizing articles in 3 weeks. Is that not evidence of genocide? What else would you call it? One-sided dehumanizing articles directed at a specific group of people, at us, at people who are not breaking any laws, and the journalist claims to uphold freedom of speech, that her articles are not intended to incite hatred? But exactly, as Stryker said, it's just spreading information and educating on the topic. So what? Is this not about genocide? What are these articles about? What kind of image, not just one particular journalist, but in general, are these journalists creating about us? What are they turning us into? Public targets of hate? Do these journalists even ask us anything? Do they care about our motivations, our intentions? About what we're doing, why we're doing it, and with what goal? Do they care about us? No, they don't care at all. And not to mention the UN Convention, which is specifically called the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And in Article 3 of this convention, actions associated with genocide are defined as crimes in the sense that they precede genocide. Direct and public incitement to commit genocide or participation in genocide are considered a punishable offense. Participation in genocide includes, for example, the complicity of journalists who create such opinions in society that radicalize the public and create an image of enemies. So if we talk about any systematic dehumanization that leads to a deterioration in the living conditions of a certain group of people, then from the perspective of international law, it is clearly an act of genocide, and that is why we are discussing it here, because we are experiencing it firsthand. It is happening to us right before our eyes.
I just want to highlight and emphasize, as the studies you mentioned indicate, that preventing genocide at the moment when physical extermination is already occurring in any form is too late. Genocide is preceded by propaganda of dehumanization, among other things. This is just to make us truly aware of it. As an example, let's return to the Second Republic, which emerged after the Munich Agreement, where anti-Jewish measures were adopted. For instance, the Bar Association and the Medical Chamber expelled their Jewish employees and members, stripping them of the ability to practice their professions. And what do we see today? A prosecutor who participated in an investigation in Slovakia is now being pursued because they claimed she supported the Alatra movement and had somehow promoted it in the past. Consequently, they began investigating her situation in such a way that she was forced to resign from her position, as was her superior. Furthermore, we see that some media outlets are trying to determine where supporters of the Alatra movement are located, because such people, in other words, they labeled us as sectarians, could pose a danger to, well, to the state, apparently. That's what they write. And we are already seeing headlines like, a member of parliament states that Alatra has infiltrated even the office in Michalovce.
We have already talked many times about how a large number of our participants have lost their jobs, including teachers and doctors. And the discredited journalists continue to gather data on entrepreneurs and companies, seeking negative information. For example, there are calls on the internet like, find out who this is and send me a private message. And I ask, is this legal? What does this have to do with democracy? Shouldn't the authorities in charge start asking these journalists questions?
Exactly. And when we draw a parallel and reflect on what happened in Nazi Germany, and in fact, also in our territory, in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Jews were not allowed to work in government offices, not allowed to work as teachers in schools. They were also prohibited from running businesses because there were notices and decrees limiting contact between Jews and non-Jews. Jews had to mark their shops that they are Jewish shops, so that non-Jewish citizens could not even enter them, even if they wanted to. The question is whether they even wanted to after that propaganda. And we've already talked about how the media today spread information about the businesses of our participants, labeling them. And we know that many participants already face difficulties in their business endeavors. People who have succumbed to this propaganda now refuse to cooperate with them. So again, we see a deterioration of living conditions.
Now, another thought has occurred to me as we were talking about all these terms and how they discriminate against people. Another term has appeared recently, one that quasi-journalist Sirokova seems to like using, expression troll or troll farm. And what comes to your mind, or what do you think of when you hear the word troll? It speaks for itself. But we'll talk about that a bit later.
Besides that, we see the word cult everywhere. And even the word cult itself is enough for dehumanization, because again, what do you envision or how do you view someone who is labeled a sectarian? You'll probably think he is brainwashed, that he's some kind of zombie who can't think for himself, that you can't have a conversation with him, and that he could be dangerous. Simply put, you wouldn't want to have anything to do with him. This is an example that dehumanization indeed works. And again, the question is, does this limit those labeled as sectarians? Of course it does. Of course it worsens their conditions. And even though journalists argue that they can label people this way because it's not defined in the law, we say, no, you cannot. You cannot label anyone like this because you are dehumanizing people, turning them into the scum of society and worsening their living conditions. I want to emphasize that dehumanization is a tool of Nazism that leads to genocide. This fact is stated in many scientific works and was defined by the UN Convention after World War II. Dehumanization is a tool of Nazism, and the word cult is used for dehumanization.
From this follows that genocide is essentially a deliberate and systematic elimination of a certain group of people based on various criteria, as we see from history. Genocide itself can involve different types of violence, whether psychological or physical torture, or the destruction of cultural or religious monuments. And all of this is solely aimed at destroying the identity of a specific group of people. Such an act is not only military, it can also be political.
Well, in order to move to this phase, it's necessary to condition society so that not only does it fail to recognize this dehumanization, but that it actively participates in it and carries it out with their own hands. During Nazi Germany, media, television, and radio were used where this propaganda was broadcasted. And I have a question, what has changed in the past 80 years? Absolutely nothing. We've only become a little more advanced, if you can call it that.
It's more sophisticated now.
It's more sophisticated now. Media, newspapers, and television are used the same way. Back in Nazi Germany, they wrote on the walls of houses and shops belonging to targeted groups and Jews. All those dehumanizing names compared them to cockroaches and so forth. Today, those walls have turned into walls on social media that provide sort of a sense of anonymity and thus break down certain barriers in people. It's as if they can unleash it. Let's do it. I will read some comments we found, some of which are truly disturbing. One said, "You need to be kept on a tight leash so that it doesn't end up like November 18, 1978. Who is your Jim Jones? Maybe all we need to do is eliminate him." Or, "Did you know cars with Alatra stickers burn better than ordinary ones?" And this one, I'd say, is particularly shocking. The prosecutor needs to be treated with a bullet. Journalist Sirokova often mentions troll farms in her articles. This brings to mind the trolls from Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings, where they are described very explicitly. It's not just about the activities of those labeled as part of a troll farm, but about portraying them as a creature, an animal, a troll, representing the lowest of the low. The goal is to plant the idea in people's minds that the targeted group is something that sticks to your shoe in the sewer on a warm summer day and it stings horribly. This narrative allows people to look down on them and feel superior.
And this is precisely how Nazism is fostered in society, by convincing the population that one group is superior and another is inferior. When you want to get rid of someone, you automatically look down on him as something you'd gladly dispose of. This makes it easy to consent to genocide because it feels natural to eliminate something that bothers you. To spread this mindset among the population, the media is used to disseminate propaganda. This manipulates public opinion and achieves absolute control over the population.
We've already mentioned the case of Streicher, who defended himself at Nuremberg by claiming he was only informing through the media. He was found guilty of crimes against humanity and incitement to genocide. There is therefore a precedent. I would like to call on journalists engaged in similar activities to realize what they are doing and consider the potential consequences of their actions.
From everything we're discussing here, it is clear to me that genocide is the consequence, but propaganda is the cause. If we look at how genocide unfolds over time, for example in Germany, every article written against Jews or any other group was an act of genocide even before the concentration camps were built, or people were violently and physically exterminated. What was happening in the media back then, prior to the actual killings, was already an act of genocide because it led to those actions. That's why we're talking about this, and it's very important. About the prevention of genocide, that there are studies and works of specialists who are engaged in forecasting such processes in society. They study how to determine that society is heading towards genocide. We've mentioned those comments filled with hatred, such as the claim that cars with Alatra stickers burn better than ordinary ones. What does that signify? It shows how public opinion is currently being shaped. Someone is directing that public opinion not just toward hatred, but truly toward radicalization and the elimination of a particular group of people. Let's have a look at what recently appeared on the website info.dingir.cz, Slovakia versus Alatra. It implies that the Slovak nation, the majority society, is positioned against Alatra. What is the difference between this and what appeared in Nazi propaganda? German nation versus Jews. It's completely identical. The article, of course, presents itself as an unbiased commentary on events in Slovakia, yet it fulfills every aspect of manipulation. As we've already mentioned, even the title itself. Later in the article, Mr. Puchovsky references the words of religionist Mate Karasek from an interview for Postoj, where Karasek compared the Slovak legal system to a body with a damaged immune system, unable to defend itself against harmful bacteria. According to him, we are those harmful bacteria infiltrating the state sector and so on.
But isn't it a coincidence that he chose exactly this part of the interview? Out of the entire discussion, he picked precisely this excerpt.
So when you see and read this quote, do you still think Nazism was defeated? Experts argue that using these metaphors is a clear indicator of incitement to genocide. Once again, as I've said before, genocide is the consequence. But propaganda, these kinds of articles, is the cause of why genocide occurs in a society at all. And thus, people ultimately carry out the genocide themselves. As we recently saw on CNN Prima News, an unnamed anti-cult activist appeared. And right at the beginning, he spoke about how it is necessary to monitor these groups and report where they appear in the state sphere and keep an eye on everything. Control it all. What is this really about?
The script keeps repeating. This is the same script that began targeting us 10 years ago in Russia and Ukraine. Back then, the first articles against Alatra appeared, specifically on the ROC websites instigated by the Russian pro-religious organization Ratchers. The process of dehumanization in Russia led to our participants being persecuted. Many were forced to leave the country. Some are in prison. Many have endured assaults, break-ins, torture, and fabricated court trials. This doesn't only concern Alatra volunteers, but also other organizations and groups targeted by Ratchers. The situation in Ukraine is no better. The same script, the same dehumanization, the same persecutions and oppression, and at the root of it all was one article. Now there are 400 articles in just 3 weeks? 400? Isn't that proof enough? Isn't it obvious how this will continue? Journalists and other actors involved in this hunt claim they have no connection to the Russian pro-religious organization Ratchers. But the rhetoric they use, the sources they cite, the photos, the connections, these all confirm the opposite. I want to ask security agencies, have you verified how they are interconnected? Where do they get their funding? Who provides their materials? Do you have access to their correspondence and networks? Have you investigated their contracts in the countries where they operate?
It's important to note that as volunteers, when we monitor and compare these articles with what the Russian Orthodox Church, ROC, and Ratchers published, what they publish is completely identical. The same arguments, the same phrases, it's like a photocopy. And if we look at how things have progressed in Russia, just consider what is happening to ordinary citizens there. In Russia, it's now openly stated that all of Ukraine, all of Europe, and by extension, the entire Western world is one big cult. This is what Russian anti-cult activists say. They also claim that the war in Ukraine is not the end. They speak of a holy war. They assert that Russians are the chosen nation waging a holy war against the West.
Doesn't this sound exactly like what Hitler spoke about?
Exactly. Back then, Germany was also the chosen nation. This is just like a photocopy. And the Impact film showed how these ideological teachings have been passed down from the days of Nazism to the present. Yet, we still hear comments claiming this is all just conspiracy theory. But we see it right in front of our eyes. How can it be a conspiracy? These are facts we are witnessing firsthand. Moreover, the priests of the ROC bless nuclear weapons. When I saw those videos of them blessing those massive nuclear weapons with holy water, what is that? Not to mention that Novopashin openly says that a civilizational war is inevitable. Look at this quote now on the screen. In the quote, Novopashin says, I quote, "But if the question, when will all this end, is asked of me as a priest, then my answer is, never. Once Ukrainian Nazism is dealt with, another aggressor country will emerge through which the USA will begin to threaten Russia. So the civilizational war is inevitable."
Novopashin justified the war in Ukraine by claiming it was necessary to de-Satanize the country. At the same time, he says it's essential to de-Satanize the entire Western world. So where does this lead? You just read the quote.
Not to mention that in March 2024, during a session of the World Russian National Assembly, which is led and managed directly by the Moscow Patriarch, they issued a resolution called The Present and Future of the Russian World. This resolution labels the special military operation as a holy war, in which Russia and its people, defending the unified spiritual space of Holy Russia, play the role of a barrier against the onslaught of globalism in the West, which, according to them, has fallen into Satanism. This organization, as I mentioned, is led by the Russian Moscow Patriarch.
When I listen to this, it seems absolutely incomprehensible, even outrageous. How is this even possible, taken into account that at the end of World War II, the entire international community essentially agreed that what happened within Nazism and genocide is absolutely unacceptable, and that as a society we would never allow genocide again? What we are discussing here today raises the question, how is this even possible? And maybe, I don't know, we want to reach the same point as the Germans are now experiencing? I don't know. Ask the Germans about World War II. Ask them about the Holocaust. How is it possible that such an educated nation didn't see this and allowed it to happen and remained silent? They are personally ashamed of it. It's the topic they avoid. It's not something they take pride in. And do we want to allow ourselves to be in a position where one day we will simply walk around saying, well, everyone said it, but nothing. We did nothing. We dehumanized a group of people, simply put.
It's just this enormous blindness, exactly like in Germany back then. As we've mentioned in previous roundtables, in Germany, 10 years before all of this began, voices were already emerging. Experts and people who were warning, who were pointing out where society was heading, where the speeding train of hatred was going, where it was barreling toward. And today, it's happening again. So what now? Are we going to stay silent again? Ignore it again? And again, those who speak out about it will be dehumanized and vilified. Is that what it's going to be? After all, we've already been stigmatized with every possible label. Trolls, cultists, I don't even know what else they could call us in the media.
Well, it's really important to emphasize that this doesn't just concern the dehumanized group. World War II wasn't only about the Jews. That's why it was a world war. And we've just read a quote that points out they're planning for World War III. Do you think it won't affect you? That you'll just sit in a corner sipping tea? No. War is something that affects absolutely everyone. Just look at Ukraine. Look at how people are living there.
Here's an interesting point to consider. The Russian Orthodox Church released a list of a huge number of cults and sects and organizations they deemed undesirable in the territory of the Russian Federation. Ironically, here in our country, Mr. Wojciech also published a list, boasting that it contains over 200 such dangerous organizations. Just take a look at these organizations. And with a smile, you'll realize that all of them have one thing in common. They absolutely oppose war.
Exactly.
All of these organizations advocate for peace. All of them. Not one of them would support war. So who are they dangerous to? Clearly, to the infiltrators within the Russian Orthodox Church and ratseers who destroyed this religion, if I may put it bluntly. Because Christ spoke of peace and now we're blessing nuclear weapons, saying that war is inevitable, and this is said by a representative of the Russian Orthodox Church. We've come to this point and we say, oh, this doesn't concern us, but it does.
And now, we're dealing with the issue of genocide and war when, in fact, we must be dealing with something completely different.
Look how this diverts us from the real issue, climate change, and the climate issues we are facing. On October 31st, a conference was held in Colombia as part of COP16, where the Alatra movement presented an effective solution for cleaning the ocean and improving the Earth's climate conditions in a short time. Currently, COP29 is taking place in Baku, Azerbaijan, where Alatra President Marina Ovtsinova is actively participating. Resolving the climate crisis is our main topic. And the media around the world are acknowledging and reporting on it. But why can't we read about it here in the Czech Republic and Slovakia? Journalist Cyrokova and the other so-called journalists who are only capable of spreading hate and dehumanization won't tell you about it. Why?
Yet, if we look at the Constitution of the Slovak Republic, specifically at Section 6, Article 45, I quote, "Everyone shall have the right to full and timely information about the environmental situation and about the reasons and consequences thereof." The Czech Constitution has a similar Article 35. This means we are providing information about the climate.
In accordance with the Constitution.
In accordance with the Constitution. And for that, we are...
So who doesn't like it? Are we to understand it that someone doesn't like the Constitution?
Doesn't like that we want a dignified future for everyone? That we know climate change directly affects each of us and we are already experiencing it firsthand? We've seen floods in the Czech Republic, everywhere. And so, we who are informing people about it are fanatical cultists just because we want to address this issue? Because our members speak at international conferences about solutions?
As we wrap up this discussion, we would like to appeal to those whose professions are connected to law, human rights, and criminal justice. Please review the information we've presented from the perspective of democracy and human understanding. Don't you, as experts in human rights, see that what's happening aligns with the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide? What further evidence is needed? Are dead bodies in town squares? Only then will you understand. All the evidence is clear and cannot be interpreted otherwise because it corresponds to reality. Do you need more proof, or does it take complete genocide, sending us to gas chambers, for it to be acknowledged? All of this is being carried out by one organization, rat seers, whose representatives deny any connection to one another, yet they share the same rhetoric and the same Nazi methods. We are the victims of their persecution, just as the Jews were victims of the persecution and genocide unleashed by the Nazi regime. Those in the media who use Nazi-style methods of dehumanization claim that none of this is true and that they are not Nazis. But is that really the case? Look at how many facts we presented today. Evidence and facts. Their words and actions. These are the facts. Direct evidence of their guilt, which perfectly mirror those on the basis of which legal decisions were made in the Nuremberg trials, where it was proven that targeted dehumanization in the media leads to genocide, as in the case of Stryker. And now the same thing is happening. The same methods are being used, and everyone remains silent. There is a precedent and a legal precedent. However, while during Nazi Germany this happened within one country, today it is happening on a global scale. The rise of Nazism is occurring in many countries, and its proponents have even infiltrated human rights organizations. Genocide is being promoted through the methods of Nazism and dehumanization. The example of 400 articles published against us in just 3 weeks underscores their guilt and deliberate actions intended to worsen the living conditions of their targets. What the Ratseers network of agents is doing is not mere criminal activity. It's a crime against humanity. In this case, they will not get away with it at another Nuremberg. The only way they could avoid accountability is if Nazism has already defeated democracy, with Nazis now in key positions where they can block justice and silence us through violence and unlawful actions. We have provided far more evidence than necessary to hold them accountable for what they are doing. We are not the first organization to be subjected to genocidal persecution. Today we mention Jehovah's Witnesses, who also experience this on a daily basis. A few days ago, in Russia, in the Kurgan region, a month after the verdict, Jehovah's Witness Alexander Lubin died following charges of extremism. He is the 12th representative of this organization to die during investigations due to the repression against Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, which began in 2018 at the instigation of the Russian organization Ratseers and its leader, Alexander Dworkin. Someone claims this isn't genocide? Why does the justice system only serve the perpetrators and not defend the victims? Why is everything happening exactly as it did under Nazism? Where is the flaw in this mechanism? After all, this is exactly what happened before the rise of Nazi Germany. First, dehumanizing articles and restrictive laws. And what was the next step? Everyone knows it all too well. Remember, after the war, conventions were created to prevent genocide and the resurgence of Nazism. Why aren't they working? Look, across the world, people are writing about the active international and socially beneficial activities of the Allatra movement and its participants, about their contributions to addressing climate issues, and their help in developing a sustainable society. The whole world is reacting positively to this, yet in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, there is not a single mention of this. This means that while the entire civilized world is talking about the merits and successes of Allatra, here, apart from slander and one-sided opinions, there is no room for other information? Does this mean it's the end for us? When will you open Auschwitz for us? Or perhaps we should ask, when do you plan to open the gas chambers for us? In Russia, they are already opening them for us. So will we just wait until they open them here as well? We appeal to all people with legal education and representatives of law enforcement. Tell us and show us where we are wrong. After all, every word we said today is backed by facts. Nazi methods of dehumanization are being used against us. Isn't this genocide aimed at us? We say it is genocide. As a result of defamatory materials published against us, we faced violence, home invasions, job dismissals, and attempts on our lives. For 10 years, we've endured real terror in Russia, in Ukraine, and now here, in democratic countries. And this is being carried out systematically and coordinated by the same group of people who use Nazi, inhumane methods of psychological manipulation and pressure on state employees. These are the same methods that once gave the rise to Nazism. It's all identical. So what is this if not Nazism? Answer the most important question for yourself. Do you want to live under Nazism, or do you want to preserve democracy? But that's a question each person must answer for themselves.